Most of them were asleep when the world ended. They had no warning, no alarm, no officer at the door telling them to put on a life jacket and get to the deck. One moment there was the low hum of an engine and the gentle rock of a ship cutting through the dark waters of the Philippine Sea. And the next, there was a collision, an explosion, and fire everywhere, all at once, consuming two ships and then spilling out across the water itself, turning the ocean into something that could not be entered or escaped. This is the story of the worst peacetime maritime disaster in history, a catastrophe that killed more than 4 times as many people as the Titanic, and yet is barely spoken of outside the country where it happened. The MV Doña Paz was a passenger ferry operated by Sulpicio Lines, running a well-traveled route from the island of Leyte to the Philippine capital of Manila. On December 20th, 1987, she departed Tacloban in the early morning hours and made a scheduled stop at Catbalogan before continuing south toward the capital. It was 5 days before Christmas. The ferry was packed in the way that Philippine ferries often were during the holiday season, when families traveled across the archipelago to reunite, when the roads were slow and the sea was the fastest way home. Passengers were sleeping in the corridors, on the boat decks, on bunks with 3 or 4 people crammed into spaces built for one. The official manifest listed just over 1,500 passengers and crew. The real number was something closer to 4,000. Tickets were purchased illegally aboard the ship at a cheaper rate during the Christmas season, and those passengers were never recorded on any list. This detail would later become one of the most haunting dimensions of the disaster, because when the count of the dead began, no one could be entirely certain how many people had been on board. Families would spend weeks submitting names to radio and television stations, trying to account for relatives who had simply vanished from the record entirely. The ship did not just sink, it erased the people inside it. At 10:30 in the evening, while most passengers slept, the Doña Paz was making her way through the Tablas Strait near a navigation point called Dumali Point, off the coast of Marinduque. Somewhere in that same stretch of dark water, moving in the other direction, was the MT Vector, a small oil tanker carrying 8,800 barrels of gasoline and other petroleum products. The tanker was en route from Bataan to Masbate. What happened next took only seconds. The two vessels collided and the Vector's cargo ignited. Fire moved with the wind and the swell, spreading across the surface of the water like a spreading map of destruction. Both ships were burning before anyone had time to understand what had occurred. Most passengers were asleep when the collision happened. Survivors reported that the lights went out immediately, plunging the ship into complete darkness. Then the screaming began. Thousands of people woke up in a black tilting burning corridor with no light, no instructions, and no one in authority telling them where to go. Corporal Luzgardo Nieto, a passenger who survived, later described what he witnessed. The crew members were running around in panic alongside the other passengers, and not one of them gave an order or made any attempt to organize anyone. The people trained and paid to manage an emergency had become part of the chaos themselves. The life jackets were on the ship. That is the detail that makes this story almost impossible to absorb. The life jacket lockers had been locked, and in the darkness and the fire and the screaming, no one could access them. No lifeboat was successfully launched. The rapidly spreading flames made it impossible to reach the launching equipment, and within minutes, the choice facing everyone on board narrowed to a single terrible option: stay inside a burning ship or jump into water that was also on fire. Hundreds jumped. They did not know that the sea around them was already ablaze with spilled fuel from the tanker, and those who made it over the railing found themselves swimming in burning water among the bodies of those who had not survived the jump. Survivors described swimming among burned bodies and sustaining severe burns themselves, with some recounting the sight of skin being peeled from people around them. Those who had grabbed suitcases and bags before jumping used them as improvised flotation, clutching whatever they could find to stay above the burning surface. In that kind of night, a life jacket is not enough. You also need time, order, and a crew that is ready. None of those things existed on the Doña Paz that evening. The fire consumed both vessels with a speed that left almost no margin for survival, and the ship sank within 2 hours of the collision. No distress signal was sent. Neither ship had a functioning radio, and rescue operations did not begin for approximately 8 hours after the collision. The passing inter-island vessel, MV Don Claudio, spotted the burning ships and turned toward the scene, its crew throwing rope nets over the sides for survivors to climb. Most of those pulled from the water had been clinging to their luggage in the shark-filled waters of the Tablas Strait. The final count of survivors was 26 people, from an estimated 4,386 souls on board both vessels. It is a number so small against a death toll so vast that it registers not as a statistic, but as a kind of silence. The investigation that followed uncovered a chain of failures so long and so interconnected that no single cause could bear the full weight of what had happened. The captain of the Doña Paz was watching a movie in his cabin at the time of the collision. Other officers were drinking in the recreation room or watching television. Only an apprentice crew member was monitoring the bridge. On the tanker side, the Vector was found to be unseaworthy, operating without a valid license, without a proper lookout, and without a qualified master. 2 of its crew had been asleep. The collision between these 2 vessels was not an accident in the way that word is usually understood. It was the inevitable conclusion of decisions made long before either ship left port. The Doña Paz disaster remains the deadliest peacetime maritime tragedy in recorded history, a reminder of what happens when safety is treated as an obstacle rather than a foundation. Every December 20th, Filipinos hold memorials for the more than 4,000 people who did not make it home for Christmas that year. The teachers and farmers and students and children who were sleeping in corridors because the ship was carrying twice as many people as it was ever designed to hold. One of the most enduring images from the aftermath is that of a 4-year-old boy found adrift on a piece of wood 2 days after the sinking, the youngest survivor, pulled from a sea that had taken nearly everyone else. He had no name recorded on any manifest. He was never supposed to be there at all. And yet there he was, alive, floating on a broken piece of the ship that had failed him, in the middle of a sea that should have been the road home.